and welcome. You're watching Medically Speaking, and I am Meenakshi Uprethi. With me, a prominent Harvard immunologist, a name which is known to all, Dr. Shiv Pillai. Thank you, sir, for joining us on NewsX, taking out time for speaking to us.
I'm happy to join. Yes.
Thank you, sir. As far as Omicron cases are concerned, they are rising across the world. There is, of course, a panic of fear in India as well. In your previous interview, sir, you have said that COVID may never end. We may eventually end up living with COVID. Would you say, sir, that we're shifting from pandemic to the endemic state, as many experts have started suggesting now?
Yes, that's very likely that we will shift to an endemic state. I don't think we will ever eradicate some version of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. There'll always be something around. We can only hope that the best scenario, and this is where we may go with drugs as well, is that we will have control and that it'll end up being like one more common virus we deal with, without as much death and hospitalization as we have seen. And as you probably have noted in India as well, the degree of death and hospitalization is less with Omicron. It's not absent. There's quite a lot of death too, but it's not as much as with the previous variants. And there are biological reasons for that.
Right. And so since you speak of, what's happening in India, the cases till now, there's no official study, but the cases seem to be rather mild. Hospitalization rates quite low. Death rates also quite low. The variant in India, the predominant variant seems to be BA.2. What do we really know about this variant, sir? How deadly is it? What do we know about the hospitalization rates? And how do you see the trajectory far as India is concerned going from here, sir?
So, BA.2 is kind of interesting. So BA.1 peaked first in South Africa. It has declined. It is starting, BA.2 is starting now in South Africa, has started. BA.2 is quite common in South Asia in general and in Denmark. Of all places in Europe, in Denmark, there's a lot of BA.2. There's not enough known. We know a lot about its structure, that it's got many similarities to BA.1, but striking differences too. But I'm happy with what the prominent viruses in India, it's also not been very severe because that was the only concern. For BA.1, the experiments have been done to show that it is not so good at getting into the lung. It gets into the windpipe, but not into the cells down below in the lung, which is an advantage. It causes less damage, less likelihood of cytokine storm, less likelihood of getting very severe disease and death. Not that it does not happen. It does happen. In susceptible people, it's still a problem, but it's much less. So I'm hopeful that BA.2 will be similar from what I'm hearing. There are no studies showing biologically that this virus, it has enough similarities for us to suspect that it'll be like 0.1, but we don't know for sure.
Right. But sir, how do you see the trajectory going from here? Do you see a trajectory like South Africa, where we saw, of course, a massive spike in cases and then a downward slide? Because in India, as far as some states are concerned, at least, we've started seeing cases decline.
In India is big, and like the US is the same thing. In the US, right here in Massachusetts, for the past 10 days, cases have been declining. On the East Coast, cases are declining quite sharply. So it's like South Africa, very rapid peak and then very rapid fall.
Yes.
And I suspect it will happen the same way in India, but given the size of the country and the times at which things have started, this will get staggered across the country a bit, but in each place, the peak will be sharp, the fall will be sharp.
Right. And so looking at what's happening in the US, what's got a lot of people worried here, fortunately, it's not happened in India yet, is the number of children who are getting hospitalized. How does Omicron affect children? Is it equally mild as it is in adults? Any which way children's immunity hopefully is better to fight the disease, isn't it?
I think the main difference to note is the following, that overall, this virus, all these viruses from these coronaviruses, are not as severe in children, but it's not zero, right? There is, and the frequency of Omicron incidence in children is extremely high. This is a highly transmissible virus. So what was not getting into kids before, now we have a version that gets into kids. So now we have lots more kids. The baseline for kids has risen. Now, if you say 1% of kids will get some issue, have issues, that 1% number has become a big number now because of the number of kids who are infected. So I don't think essentially the virus is more bad for kids. It's just that more kids are infected. So if you are going to have some complication, in that small fraction,
Fair enough.
that fraction number is gone up.
All right. So the burden of hospitalization, if it goes up, that could be a worry. So you spoke also of drugs and vaccines as well, sir. First, talking about vaccines, sir, what do you see really is a rule, the role of booster shots, sir? Because as far as India is concerned, we are yet to see a policy on booster shots, and there's a lot of to and fro which is happening. Help us understand really what is the immunity which vaccines provide us, and how long does this immunity last? Does booster really help fight these multiple variants and mutations also, which we have seen come in at least till date?
Okay, so I think the jury is not out on all vaccines being studied in great detail, but a lot of studies have been done. And to my mind, the levels of antibodies from mRNA vaccines are certainly, it's well accepted. They're much higher than what you get, especially killed vaccines. And in India, we use one vaccine, which is a killed vaccine. The levels of antibodies are not that high. They still offer protection. The levels of antibodies are not that high. It is only the really high levels of antibodies that can help you prevent being infected by Omicron. So now I think with the current vaccination, yeah, of course, boost will raise levels.
Yeah.
Ideally, boost with an mRNA vaccine when those become available in India, and they'll all become available in India at some point, would be ideal, because a combination of another vaccine and mRNA vaccine seems to give you even really good levels. So I think boosting does help. There's no question. Boosted people have less hospitalization in the US. But keeping in mind that in India, we don't have the same vaccines.
Yeah.
We have a different set of vaccines which are not giving as good antibody levels. You can say boosting should help, but may not be enough still. So I think you have to accept the fact that we haven't studied all vaccines equally, but I suspect that boosting, if you could boost people, if it was practical, if there was vaccine available, it's not a bad idea.
And that was going to be my next question, sir. Mix and match, where do you stand on it? You seem to have endorsed it to a large extent when you said that when the vaccines, right now only two, of course, Covaxin and Covishield, which is available in India, boosted with mRNA, can give higher level of antibodies. So what is really your take as far as mix and match is concerned?
My take is that if in India, if mRNA vaccines became available, and if COVID is still an issue, which it will likely be, it would make sense, starting with the elderly, to give everybody, maybe it might end up being an annual boost but I would use an mRNA vaccine. Right now, safety data, the numbers, everything is telling us, it's looking much better. I've seen head-to-head comparisons done from samples from Mongolia on a killed Chinese vaccine, on AZ, on Pfizer, these comparisons. And I think we are learning a lot, and we'll wait for all these things to be published. But that's what my guess would be. It might turn out that we will modify our vaccines, that it will be more focused towards Omicron type variants, because their spike protein is quite different. There are 36 mutations compared to the original Wuhan strain. So those changes may happen, but boosts would be helpful.
Right. And I'm sorry, sir, please go ahead, complete your thought, and then.
But I think that drugs will be the game changer in India. Okay.
So since you speak of drugs, Paxlovid is not yet available in India. Molnupiravir is. We know that there are a lot of side effects, but let's focus on Paxlovid. So you say that drugs are going to be a game changer. Help us understand really how these drugs work, and how and why do you think that they could be a game changer? Can they stop various mutations from happening? Because that really is the fear in the back of the minds of many people as well, sir.
If you think of the virus as being sort of a mini sphere with spikes sticking out on the surface, they need the spikes to get into cells. But for the virus to do its job, for its own RNA to multiply, it needs to have enzymes, which it carries in its genome. So the virus can make certain enzymes. The enzymes can allow the virus to multiply, for its protein to be broken into smaller proteins, that's a protease, and so on. So for HIV and for HCV, hepatitis C virus, by looking for the key enzymes in those viruses, it took time, it took a few years, and finding those enzymes and then studying them structurally and then making drugs to target them at specific sites, we have amazing drugs. You can cure HCV. You can actually get rid of HIV, and you can have no symptoms, right? The same thing is now happening. It took time with COVID. So molnupiravir was not designed just for SARS-CoV-2, okay? And the virus cannot afford to mutate its enzyme genes. It can mutate the surface. But if it starts mutating the enzyme genes, then it can't work. The enzyme, it can't multiply. It cannot make more RNA. So those are vulnerable points. And those are not targeted by our immune systems. Our immune system only targets the surface, so the virus changes to deal with it. But this is not targeted by, so a drug, a directly working drug that blocks the protease, which is what Paxlovid is, or a drug that blocks the polymerase, the enzyme that makes the RNA. These will be the ways to go. Now, most of these drugs we are using were designed for other viruses, and we're trying to borrow them.
Yeah. So since you speak of Paxlovid, it's not available in many countries. When we speak of mutations, I guess the fear in the back of our minds is that, all right, that this, mutation which came, Omicron, was less mild, was less severe. It was mild and we've survived it. But what if another mutation comes? What really do you think should be the way forward? Because one can eventually learn to live with coronavirus, but how do you keep fighting these mutations, upgradation of vaccines or these drugs? What really do you see in the future?
I mean, first keep in mind that the coronavirus cannot mutate at the same rate as HIV. It's not that great a mutator. It mutates, okay, it's causing problems in such large numbers, but it does not mutate at the same rate as HIV or even flu. The virus category of viruses that mutate that fast. So we have time with vaccines to slow things down. With drugs, you can actually hope. If I said there's somebody who doesn't want to take a vaccine, but he takes the drug early in the infection, he doesn't transmit it to the next people. What's happening now is in the US, in places where we have vaccination, there's less death, much less death, 24 less death. In places where some people are spreading misinformation, there's more death. Why? The unvaccinated spread the disease faster. They have it for longer, they spread it faster, they get it faster. So if those people was to start taking a drug, which I don't think they can have an argument against, you would see a cut down of symptoms. Their chances of death drop, their chances of transmission drop. And it could become very, Cipla is supposed to be manufacturing in India. Even in the US, Paxlovid is not readily available. Only a few people are getting it. They're building the stocks, right? It's early. But and Paxlovid is the first of these protease inhibitors. Other companies have them in their pipeline almost ready to come out. So availability will increase. India's manufacturing is fantastic. They will make enough. Yeah. But it's not going to be good for India and US to do it. The whole world has to get this. Okay. Right. It has to be the whole world. Then we'll get less of the virus. And if you have less multiplication, less mutation, less chances of new variants. That's the way it will work.
All right, sir, just one more question before I let you go, since we're discussing immunity in greater detail, sir. Far as immunity is concerned, we've seen that Omicron has been able to breach the so-called immunity, which we believe that the previous Delta virus provided us. Once, if someone gets Omicron, are they immune against getting perhaps another mutation, another variation of Omicron itself, or other mutations of coronavirus? What immunity does one get once they get infected by Omicron version?
So, of course, every version of the virus provides immunity, but not for a very long time, maybe for about 6 months, and not as good as vaccination or vaccination plus infection. Infection plus vaccination is pretty good. It's fantastic, actually, in terms of levels. So I think we still get some T-cell immunity, which does not eradicate the virus. It does not prevent us from being infected, but gives us some protection. We also get some level of antibodies, which also gives us some protection. The antibodies against Omicron can provide protection about 40% of what they could do against Omicron against Delta. Because there are only about 40% of the shapes. If you think of some, bulges on top of the spike, and there are some new bulges have appeared in Omicron. Yeah. Only 40% of those bulges are common to Omicron and Delta. So Omicron will protect against Delta, but like with about 40% efficacy, which is better than nothing. It's some protection. You will be somewhat protected, but Omicron is much more potent at getting into a cell than Delta. That's why Omicron, having Delta immunity was not that helpful.
Well, absolutely. And also the multiplications have been, quite a scare, but certainly silver linings are low hospitalization rates. And really, thank you for joining us on NewsX and also really taking out the time for explaining everything to us in such a simplified language. I hope this show has been as riveting as it has been for me, for our viewers as well. For now, thank you, sir.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.